We are going to begin our study in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is an interesting book. A couple different sections to it. Even a couple different languages are in it. So we're gonna study it. I don't know how deep of a dive we'll do. I think a lot of it is sort of, once again, appropriate based on the times. But I really do want to look at the character of Daniel. That's going to be the first probably half of this series. The second half will be discussing some end times, a little eschatology, and partnering that with the book of Revelation as we study this. So quick hands up of anyone who has read the book of Daniel before. Read the book of Daniel. Okay. Interesting book, isn't it? There's a lot of layers to it. That's what makes it such an interesting and fascinating book. The introduction, which is tonight's lesson, hopefully we can get through it. If not, that's fine. Continue it next week. The intro really is talking about the history. Where was Daniel? What was happening in our timeline at that point? What was going on during the time of Daniel when this was being written, when he was seeing what he was seeing, experiencing what he was experiencing. So let's start with that. So let's start. We begin a dive into the book of Daniel. This book is one of the most dissected and reviewed books in all the Bible. It has many layers, both historical and prophetical, and has both amazed and puzzled Bible scholars throughout history. The book of Daniel is one of the most profound and influential books in the Old Testament, renowned for its prophetic visions and narratives that offer hope and assurance to God's people. The book of Daniel offers profound revelations, multiple, that's why it's okay to say revelations, about God's sovereignty over human kingdoms, how he puts them in place and takes them out, and his ultimate plan for establishing his everlasting kingdom through the Messiah, his son, Jesus Christ. Now, that's what it's going to be a big theme in this, that there is one kingdom who is going to overcome all other kingdoms. And we see it with this vision, this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has in discussing the different kingdoms that were current to Nebuchadnezzar, which is the head, and then all of the future kingdoms that come along later. We'll study all of that. Okay, that's going to jump right away in the first few chapters. So we're going to study all of those. We're going to take a look at them, because then what we see in chapter 2, which is where this is there is a rock cut without hands, a stone that gets cast at the feet of this statue, and it crumbles the statue and obliterates all of these other kingdoms. Okay, obviously you could probably guess what that is and who that is and what event that is, but we're going to study all of that too. These are all different kingdoms that we'll see, including literally down to the toes. The narratives and visions we will study will hopefully inspire unwavering faithfulness in the face of opposition. At the end of the day, it's not just about the doctrinal part of it. It's about studying the character of Daniel. We're going to do that kind of toward the end of this lesson. Studying the character of Daniel and applying those characteristics to our lives and following in those patterns, following in the pattern of someone who did not compromise his faith for anything in spite of what he was faced with. And so we kind of saw that with Stephen in the last few weeks. We certainly saw that with a couple of the churches in the book of Revelation. We are now going to see that with Daniel. The Bible itself is filled with men and women who did not compromise their faith, who endured. They endured difficult situations, including their very lives being at stake, or in someone else's case, sitting in a pit filled with very hungry lions. And so as we study that, remember that the ultimate goal of studying anything in the Bible is to take the lessons and apply them to our lives, to make sure that we become more faithful, that we don't compromise, that we stick to the faith, that we continue to push harder and overcome each day. Okay. Daniel, God is judge. Timeline, about 606 BC to 536 BC. Daniel is the last of the major prophets. He preached various messages given by angels, and the book is really called the Revelation of the Old Testament. Revelation is, in fact, an extension or elaboration of the book of Daniel. It's a book of prophecies, both fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled, but it is also a book of practical motivation and application for our lives today. None of this matters if we're not paying attention to the cues in the Bible and the characteristics in the Bible of what these people endured and how they served God. We can be doctrinal all day long, but if we're not applying who he was and what he did, then none of it matters. And so we can have how many people in church over the years have we known who had a lot of head knowledge, but they weren't really living the disciplined life that God calls for? We know those people. And so head knowledge is great, but we're going to look at Daniel's character too. We're going to look to see exactly who he was and what he had to endure. It supplies a motivation for us to be found serving the Lord now during this life, each and every day. We see this in 1 John chapter 3. We see this in 2 Peter chapter 3. 1 John says, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the children of God. And so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure." That's that walking. That's that motivation towards something. And Peter says the same thing. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. But according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and new earth in which righteousness dwells. Okay? It's about applying. It's about application. It's about service. It's about moving forward. It's about momentum. As we see these things get crazier, what kind of momentum are we building in our service? Are we building positive momentum? Or are we sitting around and just sort of letting things happen around us? It's about momentum in our service, and we'll see that with Daniel. Daniel is a strong character for the Lord. He shows, by the way, I'm trying very hard to not use the word story. All right, I really am. But it's so easy to do. What a great story, Daniel and the lions in. No, it's an event. I'm trying to recondition, reword, reverbalize. It is a story, but it's an event. Story has the connotation of story. He shows integrity and love for the Lord with the predetermination in his heart to be obedient to him, even as a young man and in the face of severe, life-threatening danger. Daniel made the conscious effort to serve the Lord and the Lord only. This is Nebuchadnezzar killing many of the people, the king's family, early on, right away. We're going to take over and we're going to kill him. And so we see that happening immediately. The book of Daniel is divided into two main sections. Chapters 1 through 6 deal with the man and the prophet. Chapters 7 through 12 deal with Daniel's message and the prophecies given to him. The book contains prophecy already fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled. Now we'll kind of weed through a lot of that. Obviously, there's not a Medes and Persians kingdom that is coming up. That was yet future to Nebuchadnezzar. And so that for us is past. Alexander the Great, who we're going to see written into prophecy here, yet future for Nebuchadnezzar, long past for us. Alexander the Great is long dead. The Roman government, long past for us, long gone, but yet future for Nebuchadnezzar. Those are some of the things that we see. Yet there is another government, another kingdom that is coming that is still yet future to us. Obviously would have been yet future to Nebuchadnezzar as well. When dealing with prophecy, we are in effect dealing with unwritten history. It will happen It just hasn't happened yet. So when God tells Daniel, this is what's going to happen, it will happen. It just hasn't happened yet. I like that term, unwritten history, meaning time hasn't caught up to the events that God will reveal or unveil. Okay? The book is written in two different languages. Daniel 1:1 through 2:4 and chapters 8 through 12 are written in the Hebrew language. Daniel 2:4b and Daniel 7:20 through Daniel 7:28 is written in Aramaic. Aramaic was a language that was widely used during this time period. Jeremiah 10:11 is also in Aramaic, an answer by the Jews to their Aramaic-speaking conquerors who would attempt to seduce them to worship their idols. We see that here. Tell them this, these gods who did not make the heavens and earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens, written in Aramaic, which is the language of the nations around them. There are also two sections of Ezra that are written in Aramaic, Ezra 4:8 through 6:18 and 7:12 through 26. Perhaps this section of Daniel was written in this language so all could read it. Okay, so there's a section there where it is in Aramaic, takes a break from Hebrew, and then comes back to Hebrew. So we'll study that as we get to Daniel chapter 2. The book of Daniel accomplishes really four main purposes. One, what true dedication means, and how the Lord will bless those who dedicate themselves wholly in service to him. Daniel's just the example we're looking at. There are literally thousands of these examples all throughout the Bible. We're talking about the blessings of a God who has the capability of blessing those who dedicate themselves to him. That's what we're looking at. And notice the word I added there. Wholly dedicate, wholly in service. Not partially here and there, in and out, when you feel like it. It's a whole dedication to service, in service to him. God's care for his covenant people. He's always had men to meet the needs of his people. We're going to see that. God took care of Israel, even though Israel was in captivity and had just spent hundreds of years in rebellion against God by worshiping other gods, by playing around with these other gods, these false gods of the nations. In spite of all that, the covenant takes precedence. The promises from God to his people, God keeps his end of it. And so here he's going to make sure that Judah, in this case, Judah is taken from Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. They're going to get punished, but he's still going to protect them. He's still going to watch over them. That's the difference. He's not annihilating them. Nebuchadnezzar could have annihilated Israel or Judah. Assyria could have come in and obliterated Israel. But they didn't, because God protected them. God is protecting his people. We see that today. God has continued a string of faithful people throughout time. God is watching over his covenant people, Israel, as well. Okay? It's that commitment that God has to those who are in covenant with him. The comfort of God's people and the consolation of Daniel's words, Daniel reminding them of God, reminding God's people of God and his comfort. How this age will end and how we do not have to be afraid of the coming man of sin. That's part of the comfort words. That's the word of God, which comforts us. If you're faithful, I will bless you. It's the comfort we provide one another in helping each other out, continuing. Look, we all have the same goal here. The goal isn't wealth. The goal isn't fame. The goal isn't status. The goal is an abundant entrance into the kingdom. That's the goal. We have a common goal. And so we see that comfort coming not only from his word, but God can use other people to help us, to admonish and to help and assist. Put your arm around and say, hey, hang in there. There's some good things ahead. I know it's tough, but let's keep at it. We can do that with each other. We should be doing that with each other. We will see that Daniel always keeps the covenant people mindful of the covenant God. That was his role. He reminded them that service meant blessings in this life and the life to come. Let's look at some historical background. Okay, so we're going to dive into some of the history. This is a time of crisis for the Jews. Judah, the seat of God's covenant people, where Jesus will reign in Jerusalem, was taken captive by Babylon, the seat of all false religion. Jerusalem, Judah was down here, taken captive to where they are. This is modern day Iraq. Okay, we're going to see that in just a little bit. This is the location of the Tower of Babel, a place where man sought to elevate himself to the level of the Almighty God. Of course, now we have to read about the Tower of Babel. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, they had asphalt for mortar. Sounds like what Brother Derek's doing right now. He's building a block wall. He did the same thing. He's building, he's not going to build it to the heavens, okay, but he's building it. You have elements, we're going to build something, okay? And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men built. The Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one. They all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language. They may not understand one another's speech." The Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. It's funny to think that the language learning app is called Babel. How ironic. That's probably on purpose, so you remember it. Okay. That's in Genesis chapter 11. It's shortly after the flood. And this is shortly after. So, city of Babylon was the most splendid city in the entire world. It was made even more so under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, which his rule began in 605 BC. 8 years later came the first attack on Judah. Other attacks followed in 586 and 581 BC, the result of which was to send several thousand inhabitants of Judah to Babylon as captives. These groups of Jews joined already other previously enslaved people, supplementing the already large labor force employed on the gigantic tasks of reconstruction and expansion for this heathen nation. Okay? Got to go get people. They're not going to do it. You think Nebuchadnezzar's out there with a hammer? By the way, in the backyard, I found a very old rusted hammer. If anyone's missing a hammer, let me know. It is rusted to the gills. This thing is rotten. So if you would like your hammer back, let me know. Okay, it's in the backyard still. Anyways, not the point. I just thought of that. Nebuchadnezzar's not going to be out there doing it, and certainly the elites are not going to be out there doing it. So you have to bring people in to do all the menial tasks that the elite won't do. Just bring them in. Go get them. Bring them in. And so we see that with Nebuchadnezzar. Part of the already enslaved groups, already large labor force. You know what? Let's go get Judah. Now let me ask you this. Was God surprised by this? Was God surprised? Why not? What? It's his plan. How many prophets did he send? You guys better get it together. You got to get it together. I'm going to bring someone in. You're going to get taken over. Over and over and over and over. God was warning them over. You better get your stuff together. You're a wicked king. Tear down these shrines. Tear down these other gods. Start serving Yahweh, the only one true and living God. He did that over and over and over. He warned them. He warned them. And they didn't listen. And so here we go. Here comes Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, Israel and Judah had already split at this point. Israel was already taken captive by Assyria, so they're gone. Judah's left, and it's wicked king after wicked king after wicked king. A little revival, and then wicked king, wicked king. God said, I told you. Here comes Nebuchadnezzar and the nation of Babylon. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, do you know what prophet or what time predicted this Babylon? Was it like Isaiah, Jeremiah?
Yeah.
Predicted
Yeah.
Babylon taking over?
It was, yes. They were coming in. I'm trying to think if it was Elijah as well. There were other prophets who were there who were warning constantly. Now remember, some of them were sent to Israel. So they were warning about Assyria, which had already happened. So yes, these prophets were warning of Babylon coming in. I believe Jeremiah is, yes. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to double check it. A young Daniel was part of these groups, okay? These groups of other previously enslaved people, the Jews who were being taken captive, young Daniel was a part of that. According to historians, the city of Babylon occupied an area of about 200 square miles and was built on both sides of the Euphrates River. It had 53 different temples, including 180 altars to Ishtar. So, of course, what are we going to do? Well, we've got to study Ishtar, right? I mean, we have to. And so we are. There he is. Ishtar was believed, or there she was believed to be the daughter of Anu, the god of the sky. Now, Brother Eric right away thinking Anu, but no, that's Nanu, which is Mork and Mindy, completely different. Although she was widely venerated, she was particularly worshipped in the upper Mesopotamian kingdom of Assyria, which is modern northern Iraq, northeast Syria, and southeast Turkey, particularly at the cities of Nineveh, Ashur, and Arbela, which is modern Erbil, and also in the south Mesopotamian city of Uruk. Ishtar was closely associated with lions and with the 8-pointed star, which are her most common symbols. In the Babylonian pantheon, she was the divine personification of the planet Venus. Okay? So as they looked up, saw different gods, saw different things, this one, Ishtar, was widely well-loved. They've discovered over 180 altars dedicated just to her. Okay? One golden image of the false god Bel and the golden table in which it sat weighed over 50,000 pounds. When you go out and you pillage all these other nations, you're going to take all their gold. And so you're going to scalp it all. You're going to take it and you're going to build these massive structures, including ones that weighed over 50,000 pounds. There were several other golden idols placed all around the city. Once Nebuchadnezzar felt secure in his conquest, he began to devote an increasing amount of attention to the expansion of other cultural interests. He built several ziggurats, large towers that were crowned with a small shrine and altar dedicated to a particular false god or deity. Massive structures, typically in a pyramid shape, that had steps walking up to it. And at the very top of this was an altar, a specific altar or shrine dedicated to whatever god that was built for. Ziggurat. It's just fun to say too, by the way. Ziggurat. We should have named our dog Ziggurat, just for fun. One of these ziggurats, located in the southwest side of the city, was a tower attached to a temple shrine dedicated to the false god Marduk. Marduk, calf of the sun, solar calf, was a late generation god from ancient Mesopotamia and patron deity of the city of Babylon. When Babylon became the political center of the Euphrates Valley in the 18th century BC, he slowly started to rise to the position of the head of the Babylonian pantheon, a position he fully acquired by the second half of the second millennium BC. The city of Babylon, Marduk, was worshipped in a huge temple called Isagilia. Okay? Huge temple, massive worship. Okay? Where does this all sound familiar? We should be thinking of when Paul walked around Athens. So here's hundreds of years later, Paul is walking around Athens and seeing these shrines to all these different gods. And there was one just as a catch-all to the unknown God. And so as he's walking around Mars Hill, he sees all of this. So this was happening constantly. And as we study on Sunday afternoons, we see that these nations were filled with this polytheism, the worship, the study of many gods. Okay? Worship and love for many gods. Okay. This tower temple is believed to be the reconstructed and modified temple Tower of Babel from Genesis 11. Many of the temples and shrines dedicated to these false gods were 8 or 9 stories high. The Jews, along with other groups of people that were taken captive, were forced into building these massive structures. Now, it's funny because they've kind of come full circle. They were doing this in Egypt, building pyramid type of structures and other structures. Then God releases them, and as part of his punishment, God puts them back in this position where they're once again slave labor, building these same types of structures. Others taken captive were taught the language, customs, and religious practices of the Babylonian people with the intent that they would begin to assimilate into their culture and beliefs, right? You have a generation that comes in, similar to the generation that was released from Egypt. They knew what to do. They built a golden calf. How did they know how to do that? Because they had seen it in Egypt. And so that's what they knew. And so here, the idea was taken captive, just sort of inundate them with this polytheistic way of life, and eventually they'll just assimilate and blend into. Now you've got a large population of people who you have their loyalty. This is eerily familiar, really, to what's happening today. You're bringing people in to create a sense of loyalty. Hey, you're part of us now, with the idea that they would blend in and have loyalty to the people who brought them in. That's what was happening back then. So, as the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. Okay? This was Daniel's situation, along with 3 of his friends. This is a writing tablet that has been discovered in one of these ziggurats that talked about the conquest of Judah. Okay? Unearthed. Actually, quite a bit. Nebuchadnezzar's palace has been unearthed. We'll take a look at that in a second. Due to Judah's forsaking of God's law, God's judgment fell, but not before warning. In Isaiah 22, God foretells of Judah's destruction. All your leaders have fled. The whole chapter, I just took a snippet. All your leaders have fled together. Without the bow, they were captured. All of you who were found were captured, though they had fled far away. Therefore I said, look away from me. Let me weep bitter tears. Do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of the daughter of my people. Okay, so there's Isaiah talking about God's mourning for what he had to do with Judah. Also, through Isaiah, God warned Judah's king Hezekiah in 2 Kings 20, 100 years before the actual siege took place. Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all that which your fathers have stored up to this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And some of your own sons who shall be born to you shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord that you have spoken is good, for he thought, why not, if there will be peace and security in my days? Yikes. I don't care what happens to the grandkids, as long as I'm good. As long as it's far away, right? Again, we're kind of seeing this today. The people did not listen and fell under Babylonia's rule, persecution, and enslavement. This is what they believe based on unearthed ruins, that this is what Nebuchadnezzar's palace looked like. This blue in the sun would have been pretty spectacular. Would have been pretty cool. So, but I enjoy blue and gold, so I for obvious reasons. So I enjoy blue and gold. There's another, you can see these ziggurats being built. Just another artist rendition of what the city may have looked like. That is probably one of our cousins right down there. So yeah, he's right there. And another one. Pyramids in the background. Okay, a general view of the ancient city of Babylon. That's what this picture is. So they have unearthed all of this. This view, ironically enough, is taken from Saddam Hussein's palace when he was there. He built on top of a mound, like a little overlook hill. He built his palace to overlook Nebuchadnezzar's palace, which is right there. They've unearthed all of this. And so that's how they're sort of putting it together, that this is what it looked like based on what they've unearthed. So this picture was shot from Saddam Hussein's palace, which lies on a mound that overlooks the city. Now, Saddam Hussein is dead, for those who don't know. He's been dead for a while. But when he was in charge, his palace overlooked Nebuchadnezzar's palace's ruins. The south palace of Nebuchadnezzar lies on the right. Ruins of the north palace of King Nebuchadnezzar here. Again, this palace was not reconstructed during Saddam's era, but he commissioned quite a lot of unearthing, and before he went crazy, he actually allowed a lot of different countries to come in and help unearth it, and then he realized that they were discovering quite a bit of stuff, and so he booted them out and said, we'll handle it from here, just in case there was any treasure or anything buried that was still there. Probably long pillaged, but nonetheless, he wanted to keep all of that to himself in case they found something incredible. But yeah, it was quite expansive. Keep in mind, the city of Babylon was 200 square miles. So that's a big area, and actually was built on both sides of the river. This is about 605 to 562 BC. Now we have some historical background and conditions that Daniel had to face. So he's facing this group who have just latched onto this multi-god religious system. Okay, so that's where he's at. That's what it looked like. The book of Daniel begins during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and details some of the experiences Daniel and his friends had to endure during this time of crisis for God's covenant people. It will also show us that no matter what situation we are in, those who serve the Lord are able to overcome. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Okay? He's not going to throw anything at us that is too much for us to bear, that will knock us out. The idea is endurance. It's not compromise. One word that we will not use to describe Daniel and his character is compromise. Sadly, as we will see, most of Israel had compromised their service and worship to Yahweh during this time. Okay? Obviously, otherwise they're in this pickle. They're in a Babylonian pickle right now because they had compromised their service to God. They had compromised. Okay, so we're going to take a little break from Daniel. We're going to take a look at this, okay? So this road is an unhinged, we're just going to study Daniel. That's what this road indicates. This is us skewing off of this road to chase a rabbit. We're going to chase the rabbit of compromise, okay? We're going to go after this and we're going to talk about this word compromise. So we're going to skew off of this for a second. We're going to come back. That's a running rabbit. It's a picture from the backyard. There's a rabbit back there. Not really. Rabbit's the one who found the hammer. Most people compromise throughout their lives. The definition of the word compromise is to make a shameful or disreputable concession. They look for whatever is most comfortable, most expedient, and has the path of least resistance. Some people may not feel like taking a stand and are motivated by simple complacency. Don't we see that today? We see people just compromising on beliefs, morals, thoughts, rational thought. They're just compromising on it. whatever, I don't know, whatever. What was the one saying from the 60s? Tune in, turn on, turn off, turn out, turn up, radish. I don't know. What was it? It was like tune in, turn out, pop off, slap someone. No, I don't remember what it was. Anyways, it's something like that. It was long before many of your eras. It was like turn on, tune in, zone out, or I don't know. Anyways, it's just the sort of, whatever. Okay, everyone else is doing it. I'll do it. Okay, complacency. Serving our God in these last days, or at any time really throughout human history, is no different. People can become comfortable in their realm of service and may not want to change because changing would take too much effort, too much energy, too much work. They're happy and comfortable with their life how it is. They're not going to take a stand. They're just going to keep living their life because, whatever. So they compromise and do what is okay for them and okay by the world's standards. Never mind that the world's standards are always fluctuating. So what was okay 5 minutes ago may not be okay now. At some point, people may hate Ukraine. And so the world shifts against Ukraine. Everyone's like, yeah, kill Ukraine. It's like, but you still have your flag as the profile. Like it's fluctuating. God is consistent. And this is what he tried to tell Israel. God is consistent. God's not going to fluctuate. The world fluctuates. And so if we're going to try to keep up with the world, then we're constantly shifting. We're constantly moving all over.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, what I've noticed in myself and in other people as well, as far as compromise goes, is it just, in my opinion, it lines up with lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life.
Yep.
It isn't just I'm complacent, and that definitely has a piece to it. But I think of people willing to compromise because I want something that feels good. I want something that looks good. I want sin.
Yeah. It's justified behavior. It's justifying behavior.
Hey, let's compromise and let's take the tree.
Yeah.
I think of people that I interact with or that I look at that I'm like, ooh, you had this faith and you went this other way, because it looked pretty good.
Yep.
But you still thought that you could stay exactly where you're at with
Yeah.
God in the faith and go this other way and try to marry them together.
And you can't do that because slowly you're eventually drifting out, right? You're in a boat and you think you're locked down, but you're eventually drifting away.
Even if you don't drift, you're drifting away the second you make that decision.
Yeah. That's the start of it, yeah.
You can't serve two masters.
Yeah.
I know that in my own life, like trying to do that. It's been because, that looks really good. Let me go.
I'm going to go in that direction, yeah.
Relationship with God, that's cool. And,
Yeah.
I can do both.
You're trying to drag God with you as you want to go this way, and God's like, whoa, hold on. It's funny because right after Adam and Eve, you see Cain and Abel, right? Cain compromised in his service. There was clearly a way that God was okay with, and Abel did that. Cain didn't. Cain was lazy, didn't want to, didn't feel like it, whatever. Instead, offered something God was not going to accept. And so we see that. Compromise is big. Unfortunately, compromise is what a lot of people do. They are out to please themselves and not please God. And so it really can affect us in two ways. It can affect our worship. We see this in Hebrews 13. Therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate. Let us go forth, therefore, unto him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come. By him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. That's not compromise. That's worship. That's what that's meant for. It's meant for worship, realizing that we don't have a city here, that we're seeking something else to come. And so we either believe that and work towards that, push towards that, worship towards that, or we're happy and content compromising and living our best life here in whatever world, whatever realm the world wants us to. And so Paul spends the entire book of Hebrews telling the Jerusalem church that Jesus was something different and separate than what they were accustomed to. In these verses, Paul says that Jesus himself was different and separated himself from the rest of the false religion that existed and even the old law they had come to know, that Jesus was the fulfillment of that. Paul is instructing them to step outside the camp to follow him and nothing else. Paul wanted them to separate from the familiar and embrace what God had now instituted. That's not compromise. That's worship according to the plan of God. Okay, second way. Service. 2 Timothy 2:20 and 21. But in a great house, there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, some to honor, some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and prepared unto every good work. Individuals in the Lord's service are either willing or unwilling to purge or cleanse themselves for the master's use. The Lord cannot use us until we have made that conscious effort to separate from what the world says is right and to pursue what the Lord commands. And how do we find that out? We find that out in His Word. By doing this, we are not compromising, but preparing ourselves for every good work. God's standard is to be separate. A heart of separation is a quality that the Lord looks for in His people. With this distinction comes the promise that the Lord will be a father unto you, and you will be my sons and daughters. So it's not a separate in that we're elite, we're better, we're separate. We're still trying to reach the world. But in our lives, we have to be separate from what the world says is okay. Okay, that's where our service comes in. That brings us back to Daniel. Daniel's life was filled with strength and character that mirrored Christ. He never wavered in his service, even when faced with death. He never compromised his beliefs because there were threats of danger or harm, despite hostile and anti-Yahweh surroundings, which we looked at. This Babylonian area was carnal, thick with carnality and multi-God worship and anti-Yahweh sentiment. In fact, they were just enslaving these people. They didn't care. In spite of that, Daniel learned that leaning on the Lord even more was the key to success in his service and in his worship. Leaning more heavily into the Lord, leaning more heavily into his service and his worship to Him. If it was popular or followed by the world, it was not what God wanted for his life or the life of his people. And Daniel told the people that, because at the end of this 70 years, they're going to go back. God's going to allow them to go back. But in the meantime, he needed to get their attention again. Those in charge wanted to harm both Daniel and Jesus. And for what? For not following their narrative and believing what the leadership believed and following them and their teachings or doctrines. That's why they became the enemy. Daniel became the enemy because when the horn went out, he didn't bow down to worship. He stood there. He continued to pray and worship the God of Israel. He didn't compromise his beliefs for the sake of his life. He didn't compromise his beliefs for the sake of popularity or for easement or for comfortability within the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't compromise for those things. He sacrificed. He was friends with Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar still threw him in a lion's den. He didn't care. He still threw him in there. So how quickly the world can shift. How quickly it can shift. And so we're either going to ride the wave of the world and compromise our worship and service, or we're going to stay consistent with a very consistent God. That's a big difference. Neither Jesus nor Daniel sold out, and both were blessed by their heavenly Father. For the Father is the one that they prayed to. When crisis came, when trial came, what did they do? They both prayed to their Father, their heavenly Father. That's who they leaned on. Lion's den or the garden, it didn't matter. They relied on God. And so that's not compromise. That's the opposite of compromise. That's leaning more heavily. It's a crisis. It's a big decision. It's something that's happening. It's chaos. What are we going to do? We're going to lean more into God. We're going to lean more into God. We're going to be in prayer even more. We're going to read and be consistent even more. And certainly choose to not compromise. That's it for tonight. That's the intro. Yeah.
purposefully or not, but I think they confuse compromise with falling or stumbling and being covered by God's grace when they ask for forgiveness. I think there's a difference, and I think people who compromise take advantage of what they think is God's grace. Like, oh, he'll forgive me, God's gracious, he's a loving God, he'll be fine. But there's a distinct difference between compromise and I stumbled and I fell because we have a sin nature. And I think those waters get muddy.
Agreed. Stumbling and falling is part of the gig. It's part of the gig. Because just like we talked about, the devil's doing this as we're walking, as we're running down the path, he's sticking his foot out. He's trying to trip us up. Compromise is, I've just given up and I'm going to go this way. Or I'm going to try to talk God into maybe this is okay to do. I'm going to be okay, right? God, you're okay with this if I push the envelope a little, push the boundary a little bit. I know it's outside of your plan, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then we're good. And then we're going to do this. How many laws are in existence, or how many laws are not being, followed? Because, they're not that big a deal that we would have seen 40 or 50 years ago. I mean, as long as you steal less than $1,000 from Target, you're good. Are we kidding? Like, that's a thing? The only crime is that tomato prices have gone down. That's the real crime. That's the main crime. Like, we're seeing crime being compromised, bad behavior, immorality, compromised, being okay. It's okay. We're okaying alcohol, marijuana, and gambling. Those are okay now. Those are all very addictive things, very addictive things. And yet we're okay with it. We're just going to justify it. But hey, just try to do it and right, ending every beer commercial with drink in moderation. Okay. Those kinds of things without long-term effects or what's happening. Gambling is a serious thing. So is drug use. So is alcohol. So is pornography. So is all this stuff that is addictive. It's addictive stuff that can hurt us and certainly cause us to not just stumble, but to fall away. But Lord, it's okay, right? It's okay, right? Got to be careful with that. And so as we study this together, let's keep that in mind when we look at Daniel. Because Daniel is definitely a pattern of Christ, where Daniel intentionally stuck with it and didn't compromise, in spite of the fact that he had a lot of opportunities to do so, and chose not to, because he wanted to live that Christ-like life.